The last topic we will cover in this lecture is the overloading of methods and constructors. We have seen the overloading of constructors before, but we are going to talk about overloading of methods first, and then we will go back and revisit the overloading of constructors. So a method is said to be overloaded if there are two methods in a class that share the same name, but they have different parameters list. So for example, here, if you look at this here, we have a class called myMath, all right? And inside this myMath, I'm trying to define a method that is going to square a number. So a number, you give it a number and it's going to give you the square of this number by just simply multiplying the two numbers together, or the number by itself. So this is a method that is called square. And you will notice that there is another method in the same class here within the same or the scope of the class. There is another method that is called square. All right. Now these two methods, even though they are called square, one of them is taking an int and the other is taking a double. In this case, in that sense, we call that the square method is overloaded. Is overloaded. So this means two methods in the class share the same name. However, you will notice that they have different parameters list. Now, the difference in parameters list, even though they have the same name here, number and number, that doesn't matter. The difference in parameter list comes from the fact that one of them is taking an integer and the other is taking a double. So that makes the difference. All right. Now, let's have a look at this concept and try to understand more what are possible ways of overloading a method. So here I'm going to create. I have overloaded demo, and I'm going to create. Let's say, for example, here I would like to compare maximum of, or try to find the maximum of two numbers. All right, so I would like here to say, for example, system.out.println. All right, and I would like to somehow call a method that is called max, and this method max is going to take two numbers, let's say 3 and 27. And I would like it to return or print the maximum of these two. Of course, at this point, we don't have any method called max, right? So what I'm going to do here, see here it says method max int doesn't exist. So let's go here and define a method, all right? So I'm going to define public. It's going to return an integer. It's called max. It takes two integers, int a, int b. And what it does is that it says if a is greater than b, return a, return b. So what that does is that it says if a is greater than b, return a. If not, then skip this f and return b. Now, if I try to compile, it's not going to work. Why? Again, we just covered this. This is a non-static method that we are trying to call in the static context of the main method. So main method is a static method. We cannot use it to call again. Static methods cannot access instance methods. All right. So in this case, what you want to do is to make this one also static. So I could say static here. Now, if I compile, it works. So in this case here, if I run and look at the result, what do we get? There we go. 27. All right, so that is 27. All right, now let's say I would like to create a similar method, but this time it's taking doubles. All right, so I'm going to do the same exact thing here, and it's going to compare two double numbers. So here double, it's going to return a double. Here's a double and a double. Now, this is a perfectly fine overloading. It's the same method name, yes, but it has different list of parameters, right? This takes int. This is different from double. So compile, and then I will run again here. Let's make this one, for example, here 3.5, 7.2. All right. Now, to understand which one is running, system.out.println, and we say here max double. All right. And here I'm going to make this int. All right, compile. Max double is running. All right. Let's remove this. Max int is running. All right. What if one of them is double and the other is int? Double. So you see, so Java is going to automatically choose the proper method that is going to work and match these values. All right, that process is called binding. We will talk about this in the next slide, but before we move, I would like again to start talking about what do we mean by different. So overloading, it means it's using the same name, max. We cannot change that. What we can change is the list of parameters. So here I could go and do another double here, but this time I'm going to say, if I try to compile, I'm going to get compile time error. See here, this one, it says method max double is already defined in class overloaded demo. So it has seen a method that is called max that has double as input. All right, and if I change it int, it's going to give me the same thing. However, since it just cares about different list of parameters, I could say int double. Compile, it works. All right, I could also say double int. Here. All right, so here this is int double, this is double int. All of these are overloading the max method, right? But they have different type of or list of parameters. So if I run this one here now, and instead of going to double as before, because that was the only option that we had, now we have a specific one for int double, which matches exactly this. So that's why it moved from double to int double. So that's what we call overloading. And the key here is that they have the same name, but they have different list of parameters. Now that process of binding, as we said, all right, is done based on what we call the method signature. The method signature, and you need to be very careful with this definition because this is where many people get confused. The method signature is defined by the name of the method and the list of parameters. All right, so that was not a good. Here, let me, I want to keep this one. I'm actually trying to emphasize the fact that a method signature is limited to this one here. That's a method signature. That is the method signature. Now notice here that we will get an error. Why? Because because here, this is called square, this is called square. It takes int as an input, this takes int as an input. Now, even though this is an integer and this is returning a double, Java doesn't care, it's always going to give you an error about this. All right, why? Because the method signature, again, is defined by the name, type of parameters, and the order of parameters. All right, so it didn't mention anything about the return data type. So the return data type is not part of the signature. Here, return type is not part of this signature. All right, so you have to be very, very careful with this. So if I go back here to our code and try to copy that exactly here, but then I change this double to be int, all right, it's going to give me an error and say method max int double. You see, whenever even it tells you the error, it tells you about the name, the list of parameters, and the order of parameters. So it has seen max int double before here. All right, even though it returns integer, it doesn't care return data type is not part of the signature. That's the key. All right, so that's overloading methods that share the same name, different list, and type of parameters. The same concept goes with constructors, and we have seen this before. Actually, we have overloaded constructors before. All right, we have done this. The class constructors are also methods, right? But we call them special methods, right? So here, if you look at this, they are special methods. So, all right. That means that they can also be overloaded, and overloading constructors actually gives the programmers more than one way to construct an object of that class. So a good example, sorry, I'm still getting used to this pad. A good example of this is the noarg, right, which mimics the default, and the arg constructors. Now, the noarg constructor, that is a single one. It mimics the default constructor. But arg constructor, when we say arg constructor, could be any number of arguments, any types of arguments, any order of arguments. All right. So similarly, very similar to methods, you can overload the constructors with any number of constructors that you want to build. All right. So all the restrictions that we had before applies to the constructors. And notice here that a constructor, you don't have an option, right? It has to have the same name. It's the name of the class, right? So inventory item class, all the constructors must match the inventory item name. But one of them is noarg. The other is taking a single input, which is a string. The third is taking a string followed by an int. A fourth could take an int then followed by a string, even though it's not a good practice to confuse the user, but that's a possibility. You can do that. All right. If you remember the default constructor, we have covered this before. Default constructor, numeric instances are set to 0, char is set to empty, reference instances are set to null, and the boolean is set to false. So this is how you build a noarg constructor to mimic the default constructor provided by Java. And if you remember, when I say that, I don't know if you remember this or not, we said if you do not define any constructors, Java is going to provide you with a default constructor. But once you define your first constructor, no matter what that type is, Java will understand you know what you're doing, you are responsible of defining your constructors. It's going to take that default constructor back. It's not going to provide you that constructor. If you want, you go define your own noarg constructor to mimic that behavior. As we said, we provide the noarg constructor, all right? It accepts no arguments, and it performs this process. And that's a good practice to actually have multiple ways to define constructors. Sometimes you find that, no, I need to define constructors in a very specific way. If you want to use my class, this is the only way you use it. That's up to you. But in general, you try to give as much flexibility as you can in building objects. As I said, yeah, this is also, we mentioned all of this. At the beginning of this lecture, I told you we have covered the overloading constructors before.